Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Congratulations on finishing term one. This is a big deal. You guys have to take a step back and realize like you guys got through one entire crazy term of med school. Like you are like 1/16th. I don't know like what the math runs out. That's why I chose to become a doctor instead of, going into statistics. But um you guys are a good chunk of the way through. You're almost there, right? Halfway done through 1 year of med school. So this is a big thing. Congratulations again. And we have some advice for you on term two. So just a quick introduction. My name is Kishore. I'm a newly minted year two med student, as crazy as that is to say. And I'll let Cass introduce herself.
I am Cassidy, and yes, Kishore and I are friends. We are in the same term, so we both just completed term two, and we'll be starting term three in a few weeks.
And we put together, just some series of slides kind of going over it, just a nice outline. And feel free at any time to kind of like put questions in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself. We like to hear from you. So we're not just talking into a black void for the next however long this meeting is. So, the general things that we're going to cover with you are just the outline of what you're going to be expecting in term two, as well as our individual advice, and then we'll open it up for some questions and etc. Okay, cool. Yes, if you guys like our little bitmojis, we threw that in there for good fun. So I always love that. So term two. Okay, it's going to be hormones, guts, and brains. That's just a short, simple version of it, but we'll get into the nitty gritty. So here's the TPLG is kind of managed by a group of us, and it's a awesome group. If you guys haven't joined yet, here is the QR code. I'll put a little bitmoji with the, me enjoying some tea in there too for good fun. So feel free to scan and join the group when you guys can. And we have some good resources that we'll post for you guys, as well as review sessions, sign up links, and etc. Cool. Term two overview. You're going to get a more comprehensive version of this. So I want to kind of skip all of the, the formalities and just kind of get into the weeds with this. So what we're going to do essentially, or what you're going to be doing is ER, which is endocrine and reproductive system module. Okay, that's a 3-week, 2-part kind of module that covers essentially all of the endocrine organs as well as the reproductive organs and how they cross communicate. And obviously none of these systems are isolated in and of themselves, but it's an awesome module. It's one that I prepped for during break like a crazy person, but it was fruitful and we did generally well on it. And it's a great little module to kind of get you back into the game after a nice long break. After that, you get into a beast of a module. It's kind of like MSK plus, MSK on steroids, but it's digestion and metabolism, DM for short, and that covers biochemistry, anatomy, physiology, and it's 4 weeks long, kind of like MSK, but you get into the full depths of biochemistry, all of the pathways that you spent your precious undergrad hours learning, it's going to all come back with a clinical relevance. So um, that was a tank of a module. Let's just say that it really pushed our limits as to like how much we can remember because it kind of felt like MSK light because you got all of this anatomy, all of this physiology, and then you like got like thrown into the full-fledged module with biochemistry too. 4 weeks, you covered all of digestion and metabolism plus the anatomy and physiology to go with it. It really pushes you to the limit. So you guys got to take those weekends to like rest and recover, and don't just grind through it. It's a marathon for this one for sure. And we'll have
Very hard. I had
plenty
a
of
lot of
review
mental
sessions.
breakdowns. Yes, I had a lot
Yeah,
of mental breakdowns in DM. Like looking back, that was a really rough one. So for sure.
it was, and it sets you up perfectly for NB. That is a roller coaster. This is the one that is most feared. DM did push us to the limit, but NB, it's for really brainy folks. Let's just say neuro no joke. You got to kind of lock up with the material, got to make sure it sticks because they really compound on each other. So the first thing you're going to be covering, remember, NB, it's neuroscience and behavioral science. It's 9 weeks. It's a giant module, kind of freaky, but NB1 is nerves and tracks. And this thing scared everyone. Okay. Like this was the most hyped and most terrified kind of subsection of this module. It's basically the peripheral nervous system as well as the central nervous system and how they basically cross communicate with the tracks, innervations to muscles, all sorts of stuff. Okay. 3 weeks long, going to cover all of it. Kind of freaky, but trust me, it'll set you up perfectly for NB2. We're going to cover mostly like cranial nerves and anything like facial area, as well as the tracks that are more localized with your sensory, visual kind of inputs, etc. Okay. And finally, you get to this sweet module that's a quiet relief from all of that madness called behavioral sciences. And they have some amazing professors there that are just like literally lights of joy if they could be quantified and like squished into a person. So like this is essentially how I like to describe NB3. They have amazing professors. They go through all the material very thoroughly, but you still got to put in the work. You think psych is a great module, it's like, like it all connects. Like it's nothing like completely abstract, but you have to be very specific with the parameters that you learn for the psych disorders. And then finally, the big crowning achievement of your, year one of med school is going to be BSCE. This thing is a cumulative examination of term 1 and 2. Okay. Yes, it is a tank of a exam. It's great because you guys have been basically taking USMLE style questions all through this time. You guys have been doing it from term 1 all the way to this point. So you're going to have an amazing kind of prep for it. And we'll go over the individual advice for BSCE as time gets closer and closer to it. But if you guys are doing OPLG and other things, it's going to really help with this kind of process of keeping your cumulative examination, and knowledge consolidated. That being said, the general approach, my favorite thing, I think it's a quote that I kind of learn and live and die by. It's learn one, do one, and teach one. It's a common one that they kind of pass on in surgery. I don't want to go into surgery. It's a cool field, but it's a great little saying that helps kind of consolidate and put into practice how you can kind of approach medicine. So, like I said, ER, Kassidy, feel free to jump in at any point. We cover basically all the hormones, their mechanism of action, the biochemical synthesis and the pathway of them, as well as how repro kind of intermingles with the endocrine system. And you'll cover more anatomy and physiology with repro, whereas endocrine tends to be more focused towards the hormones and how they interact overall with the entire human body. Okay. Any comments there, Cass?
I will just say that I wish I would have done ER a little bit differently. And if that's going to be the first one that you guys are going to jump into, maybe this is the one to focus on, at least for now. But it's only 3 weeks long. And with that being said, I think it's actually less than 3 weeks long. It was like 3 weeks, and our exam was on like the Thursday of the third week. So I made the mistake of that first week jumping back in, brand new semester. I was kind of like not super motivated yet, kind of slack, kind of not really ready to like dive back into the material. And by the first weekend, I realized that I had like a week left. And then for us, there was new material taught the night before the exam. So like I remember Wednesday night, we still had lectures. We were learning like all of diabetes, and we were kind of annoyed about that because we had an exam the next day. So it goes by very fast. And if you don't kind of take it seriously right out the gate, then it's very easy to get behind. So I would say just pay attention to the time frame because it's very short. And it is going to be the easiest one of the term. And I remember saying, like, even to the people that gave us advice, I was like, whoever said ER is going to be the easiest module, like, this is not true. And it, in hindsight, it was definitely the easiest module. It just didn't feel like it, but it went by very quickly. So it is a good opportunity to kind of start off strong outside, like right out the gate, and get a good grade. But I regret not doing so. So I would definitely say pay attention from the get-go because it's very quick and it probably has an opportunity to be your highest grade if you take it seriously.
Definitely. I definitely had a grand old time with ER, kind of looking back, and then I got to DM, and then I was like, whew, it's getting real. So, like I said here on the slide, welcome to the madness of biochemistry. We're learning essentially how we, when food goes in, we don't think about the multitude of different biochemical pathways that are literally breaking apart food and reforming them into usable, workable energy sources. That's essentially what you're learning: input and then output, right? And then how in that process where energy gets distributed, as well as what type of usable energy you can have. And I think the biggest thing we learned was really focus in on the fed state versus the fasting state. Okay, like you learn all these pathways, you went through undergrad, glycolysis and relearning glycolysis for the 15th billion time, and you're still going to have questions as to how they all intermingle. The key thing that ties them all together is, are you fed or are you fasting or are you starving? So we'll get to that. We'll have individual review sessions on that. It's going to be great. Trust me. Hindsight, it's not as bad as it was hyped up to be, and we did generally okay with DM. But there's plenty of external resources. They have great professors. Upadhyaya manages that entire module, so that in and of itself is a blessing. It's a very well coordinated module. Okay, like if you ever felt like a module felt like disorganized, it's not going to be DM, because DM Upadhyaya like lays it down to the T of what you exactly need to know, and she paces it in a way where it's like it's possible to still learn the material, digest it, and still do well on the exam based off of the questions that they generate for you guys. Of course, there's like external resources, like we use Ninja Nerd a lot. And then there's plenty of grades questions, especially for anatomy and physiology. And the dreaded question set that we often ended up doing was McDaddy's 700 question series set. Okay, I know McDaddy sounds like a very cheesy name, but that document was a monster. It's basically a compilation of different questions from all different sources, from both textbooks, from Sakai questions, from everything under the sun, all thrown into this one giant document. And we did a whole bunch of practice problems from that, and we did okay on that module. DM stands for digestion and metabolism. Okay. Anything else to add, Cass, on DM?
No, just basically everything you said for sure. And I agree with what you said about it ended up being, like, in hindsight, that was my highest grade in my best module by a long shot, like by a long shot. But during it, every single day felt really, really hard just because it's just a lot of material. But we had really good resources and we had really good help from, our friends, Brady and Lindsay. They taught stuff very well. It's just one of those modules where you learn stuff in the beginning, and then by the time it's time for the exam, you just completely forgot you even learned that because it was so long ago. So we will help you guys once you get there. But in hindsight, yes, it was probably the best, and not easiest, but best and most organized ones of the term. It just didn't feel like it at all during. So it'll be okay.
Yeah, it really did feel like a marathon. So every day I felt like I learned a new pathway, and then the next day I was like, what the heck is this pathway, and why is it working the way it does? But as always, we're going to make sure you guys get some good review sessions in there so that you guys have, nice compilation of videos and resources that you guys can look back into. Okay. Now for the biggest, the baddest, NB. Okay, this is neuro and behavioral module. So 3-part module, so it's a big one and kind of important. So NB1 was kind of traumatic. And I'm not gonna lie. Okay, it was traumatic for one of two reasons. One, most people don't have a strong neuroscience background. Okay. No one walks into med school saying, like, oh yeah, I know all of neuroscience and like every single track, lesion, and pathway. Like, no, I mean, like, even if you came from a neuroscience background, it's still kind of rough. But what you have to realize is the material is taught in a way where they keep it at a level where you don't have to dive too far deep into it, but it often feels like it's disorganized because of that. You're like, how does this lesion tie into which track is messed up, and why does the clinical disorder kind of present the way it does? So it's really hard to tie things in. And honestly, you'll hear the dreaded blue slides, and you guys remember, I think back in CPR, you guys had blue slides, which basically gave you like text material from what the professors were saying. So imagine that, but like now multiple slides of those. So they'll have like one slide that they will present, followed by like 3 or 4 set of slides that are just explaining that one slide. Okay. So it's a lot. Trust me, be patient with yourself. It's a big material, and it's tested in a very unique way. So just focus on the clinicals, do the clinical cases. These are very nice PowerPoints that they've put together that really assess things along the way. Okay. We'll cover those when we get to NB with you guys. NB2 was kind of fun. I'm not gonna lie, it was a challenge, but it was more fun in the sense like every day we use our facial muscles and we like don't even give like a thought to how they, they get innervated and how they function. You have like food every day, and you have like, you have ice cream, for breakfast, and you're like, oh my gosh, like how does that sense of taste go to my brain? They cover the entire pathway, every single innervation process of the face and the neck, and it's amazing. It blew my mind, and I love neuroscience, but it's amazing. It felt like anatomy and physiology was finally coming into a mix. But the thing is, it's still challenging because you can imagine your face is a very limited space area compared to, like, let's say your abdomen or like any other part of your body. So everything kind of intermingles as to how it goes and gets innervated. Okay. That being said, it's still doable. You're going to do great. Um, and you're going to have a grand old time with NB2. Like, especially learning it, the testing is definitely still hard because it compounds on NB1, but NB2 is definitely where I started like kind of getting into the pace of things. Okay, NB3. Once, like I said before, it's great. The professors are amazing, but you got to make tables for the disorders, review the medications, and know the diagnostic parameters for, like, let's say PTSD versus bipolar or etc. So just be really, really diligent and don't drop the ball on NB3, because I was pretty burnt out by NB3 and I definitely felt like I dropped the ball. I could have definitely gotten higher if I just like had more time to just like rest and recover. Obviously, we were prepping for BSCE. We had an amazing, like, what, 5, 6 days off that were just focused on BSCE, but it still felt like we didn't have enough time getting close to the end of the term. So make sure you guys set yourself a nice pace and you don't feel completely exhausted by the time you get to BSCE. Cass, any thoughts, inputs?
Not really. You kind of hit the nail on the head. I definitely agree with the thing about MB3 that you said. It seems like it's going to be easy. Their professors are absolute angels. They're teaching stuff, and you're like, oh, this completely makes sense. Like, this is awesome. And I definitely got way more of those questions wrong than I should have, just because it's very specific parameters. So when they teach stuff, it seems easy, and then you get to how they ask the questions in the exam, and you're like, oh, okay. So it was definitely not as easy as I think, thought it was going to be. And then there's also, once you get to that exam, since it's the last exam of the term, there's a lot of cumulatives on that test as well. So while it should probably have been the easiest exam, I definitely do not agree that it was. And then the BSc, the biggest thing you can do is lead PLGs or AEP if you have the opportunity to, because that is the only reason that I was able to keep up on that material at all. You kind of have to relearn it when you're going to teach it. So that was very helpful. And that otherwise, I would not have studied for the BSc every week like you're supposed to. I mean, there's just, I would say that I was going to, but I wouldn't have. And that kind of forced you to. So if you guys do have the opportunity to do any of that stuff, even just some PLGs or whatever, or even attending, the term one material. So like towards the end of term two, we started attending the term one review sessions because that was a good way to keep up on the material as well. I would try not to neglect it till the end. I know that the January class historically has less time between their last exam and the BSCE. We kind of got lucky with the extra days and the weekend and stuff like that, but I'm not sure what it'll look like for you guys. So just, yeah, try to keep up on that as best as you can because it was kind of a beast of an exam.
Yeah, you are not only mentally kind of tired because you've done like essentially 3 different modules, plus you're going to do a cumulative exam. So BSCE grade wise, it's worth a decent number of points. And for
It's
someone who also,
more than a regular exam.
yeah,
So
more
a
than a
lot.
regular exam. So just be aware because like it's kind of like USMLE light, because obviously we haven't learned clinical medicine yet, so they can't really ask us like pure clinical medicine level questions. So it's still a good chunk of your grade. Make sure you guys try to prep for it as much as you can. Are there T1 cumulative questions on T2 exams? There are not, but the material does tend to kind of creep up because everything you kind of learn isn't irrelevant because it just comes back in a full picture, right? Like you're like, oh, I spent all this time in CPR learning about cardiac output, but like now I get to learn it based off of like endocrine stuff. Like, okay, like I have hormones that are going to elevate my cardiac output using X number of parameters. So don't read too much into that because you're going to kind of put yourself in a nervous wreck. But they do a nice job of tying everything together. So you guys are going to be completely fine. They don't get into the as much nitty gritty as you would with like a module level exam. So just be aware of that. All right, we've been kind of sprinkling in advice in between. So um, obviously I'm just going to give you guys a quick run through and then you guys can, we'll open it up for kind of questions too. So we just compiled this, and Cass and myself can kind of speak more into it, but I'll just run through these. And what we typically tend to do is just post read the slides with the group, run through the clinical correlates. I basically have like you guys have seen my notes. So they basically like are like compiled with anything that was in the lecture slides with the clinical correlates tied specifically to, let's say, an anatomical structure or a particular, tendon, ligament, or etc. I also made like kind of flow charts for endocrine, so that was really helpful of where a hormone might like play another role with a another hormone and how it can kind of like elevate your heart rate or like change this X number of parameters, so on and so forth. Seriously, guys, the biggest thing you guys can do for yourself, do the quizzes, do the IMCQs, do the Gray's questions, the DES question packs. And I kind of put them in like order of importance. Quizzes are really hard. Okay, those weekend quizzes, they're meant to be hard. So if you have a grand old time with them, you're going to be fine. IMCQs are more reflective of what you're going to be likely to get tested on because they're very like specific. Previous terms have kind of compiled these IMCQs too. So you can download like last year's or the previous year's kind of IMCQs, go to the various DES pages, download those. I tend to do those a lot, even as kind of like a even couple of hours leading up to the exam, kind of like put myself in the exact same train of thought before jumping into the actual exam. Grades questions, really specific to each module, and you're going to be assigned some of those. So it kind of felt like, once again, DM, we got a lot more Grace questions. I really didn't care too much for it because most of the questions that we were asked were from the Sakai questions, and they were great. And they were great, reflective of what we actually saw in the exam. DS question pack, last but not least, but they're great because they give you a lot more kind of challenging questions. But remember, these are all student driven. They've like compile these from multiple different sources so you can't have external validation of the actual, questions and etc. Okay, external resources, be very kind of cautious with this. I use a lot more external resources in NB because I found those concepts to be much more challenging because I had no idea what the heck the professors were saying sometimes because they're just be like, oh yeah, this track crosses over at this point and then it decussates over and goes to this part of the brain. And you're like, okay. And then they'll ask you questions on like what Brodmann area is that? And you're like, why couldn't you have just made my life easier and just asked me what Brodmann area is the primary somatosensory cortex? Like, but they like to definitely build on the concepts from each NB subsection or submodule. So make sure you guys be very careful. We'll link you guys to the external resources we used when we get closer to each of the modules so that you guys aren't kind of overwhelmed today. I always am a big advocate of drawing out the anatomical concepts because it really helps kind of putting it into visual memory, especially whiteboarding or taking your iPad level notes or etc. It's amazing what just drawing it out or instead of just, you know, passively looking through the slides. Okay, do cumulative review when you can. We were definitely tardy on this. We were like, oh yeah, like we remember CPR, like it's gonna be great. And then by the time we got to CPR, we were like, for your guys' review, and we were like, oh shoot, we got to make sure we constantly like refresh ourselves on this material. Otherwise, it can quickly leave your brain like a leak channel. Okay. All the puns you guys can make from that is great. Learn it as a map. Okay. Make sure you guys are tying things together because it helps stick in your brain much better. Because when I learned about like, when you guys were in CPR and you guys learned about your left renal artery being blocked, that can potentially lead to ER level issues, right? I don't want to give too much away right now because I'm just going to freak you guys out, but like it all ties in together, right? It's really, really beautiful how like these intermingling of different modules can kind of pull it all together and make it into a kind of a map-like presentation. As always, assess your weak points. Let's say you killed it in MSK. You're like 95 and above, like, ballin IEA standards, awesome. But, you had a big struggle in CPR too, because you were just burnt out. You didn't have enough time to learn the material. Go back and review, the previous terms recordings or postings of the videos so that you can kind of refresh yourself, be more aware and capable of the material that you're not super strong on, and that it kind of sets you up for a better outcome in BSc. Do that earlier rather than later. I definitely pushed mine till later, even though I was doing weekend review sessions with you guys and etc. It helps to address it sooner so that you don't feel super pressured and burnt out close to the end. Okay, that's just a series of general things. Cass, any additions, comments, concerns?
No, not really. I definitely always stand by like with what Kishore said about doing the questions that are assigned by the professors. This is always something that I have been like a very strong proponent of, doing the Sakai questions, the quiz questions, the IMCQs, the previous terms version of the same IMCQs, the alternate version of the IMCQs, because those questions are written by the professors who are writing the questions for the exams. So when you go and you venture out a little bit and you start doing the student written questions, sometimes they can be wrong, or sometimes they can maybe not match up super well with how the exam is going to be. But if you do every version of the IMCQs and the Gray's questions and the Sakai questions, that's usually enough to get you by. And then with what he said about going back and looking at your quizzes and your exam breakdowns for the weak points, I found with myself that when I actually would go back and analyze my exam breakdowns and my quizzes, I often was getting stuff right that maybe I thought I was getting wrong, or getting stuff wrong that I thought I was getting right. So just because you felt like you were weak in something when you took the exam, you might actually be getting all those questions right. That's kind of how it was in our NB2 exam. We had an intro to psych questions, and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know any of those, but ended up getting a lot of those right. So your weak points might even end up being not what you thought they were. You might be thinking you're killing all these questions on the exam and you might actually be getting them wrong. So that's why it's important to make sure you download your exam breakdowns after them. I know it's easy to forget sometimes, but download them, rename them so you don't have 26 exam taker answer reports in your download files, and then organize them. So that way, when it comes time for BSCE, you can go look through your exam breakdowns, see where you missed a lot of stuff, see where your weak points were. And then same thing with the quizzes. Like it's very helpful if you do that in the beginning, because that last weekend I realized I hadn't downloaded like half of my quizzes, and so I was going back through trying to organize all that, and it would have been helpful to keep up on that throughout the semester. So
Exactly. Those are really important, guys. So as always, like, we learned from experience and we want to pass that on to you guys so that you can do better and like kill it when you guys get to BSCE and you guys aren't as stressed out as we were kind of prepping for it. That being said, trigger warning, okay? Proceed with caution. If you're going to prep for T2 over break, okay, in all seriousness, you're going to be a gunner, okay, high achieving student. You can essentially get through the first module for term 2 before it even starts. Okay. I have very little. I had like what, 3 or was it 4 weeks before ER or like term 2 began, and I had completed essentially the entire module. Okay. Obviously, I stressed myself out and I learned all of it. It was great because it really primed me for jumping right in and going through the material. And I didn't have that initial kind of, I have to get back into the swing of things kind of hurdle. But that being said, I was more burnt out by the end of the module. So it's like you give some and you get some. So it's a give and take. You got to be very cautious with this. Obviously, if you want to do this and you guys have a longer break, you have to set a schedule. You got to pace yourself while covering this material. Even if you passively run through it, it's going to help you at least a little with having at least getting the first pass of the material. And you're going to, by the time you're going to show up for a lecture, you're going to be completely set with at least understanding what the heck is going on. Okay. For the external resources, use it very efficiently. Okay. Don't just go watch all of Boards and Beyond for ER and just be like, okay, I'm going to be set. Obviously, the goal is you're going to be tested on SGU material, right? When you're prepping for Boards and Beyond is great. Osmosis is great, but you got to be very targeted with this. So don't just go with every single lecture slide and you're like, okay, like I'm just going to cover all of this in the Boards and Beyond. Watch the previous terms lectures or other material, like look at the slides, learn those when you can. Okay. Now, if you guys are doing OPLG, start prepping for those, because you don't realize how much effort it takes to throw slides together until you start throwing slides together and you are a perfectionist, because you guys are all med students and you're like, my slide has to look amazing while delivering the content most efficiently and beautifully as possible. Start prepping, start looking at what the previous terms have done, find out what worked for you, what didn't work for you, and it's going to make your life so much easier. Okay. Now, use Grace's, Firehouse Meds kind of schedule, BSE schedule, if you guys need to review any of your T1 concepts that you were weak on. If you guys have a big chunk of time, you guys have more time than we do for break. So you can start addressing some things here and there. You don't have to spend your entire weekend or your entire break relearning T1, but you can definitely cover essentially, like, let's say you didn't do so well on lower limb anatomy. You can start covering that. You don't need to cover the entire module. Just make sure you address the specific parts that you really struggled on. And of course, this is not part of the trigger warning, but enjoy your break, guys, because term 2 burnout is on a whole new level. Okay, it's not fun. It will really push you to the limits, because term 1 set a tone. Okay, now term 2 will really push you to the next level. And it's amazing that you guys are learning all this material. It's wonderful because it's going to make you guys better doctors one day. But you guys are still humans. You're going to still feel exhausted by the time you get close to the end. And don't overcommit to things. Okay. Cassidy knows this about me. I'm like one of those kids who are just like, yo, I got to do everything in the beginning. It's going to be great. But you don't realize this until you are burnt out at the tail end and you're like, I have hardly enough time to breathe. So if you guys are aware of this, be cognizant of it, of your own limits as a human being, you guys are going to be completely fine. Okay. That being said, enough of us rambling. We're going to address your specific questions. We're going to open it up. So feel free to raise your hands, ask
There's a
questions.
couple of questions in the chat. So as far as an Anki deck for the BSCE, Kishore can probably answer that. I think there was one, but I think also it'd be good to maybe keep up on term 1 Anki stuff during term 2. I personally am an anti-Anki person, so let's let Kishore answer that one.
Yeah, there is, you guys can continue. Okay, so Grace has this, she has a pre-sorted deck. You can use that, but use the daily review kind of tab or like the sub deck to essentially review the concepts that you want to review on the daily. Okay, and it's a nice thing because it's randomized, so it's going to test you on every single concept from term 1 in a very generalized manner, right? Like it's going to be like some days you're going to get like a little MSK, a little CPR, a little FTM. Obviously, remember with Anki, you're going to be very specific. Okay, it's going to ask you like very module specific questions or like cards. So just be aware, they're not going to go into that level of depth in BSCE. Okay, they're going to cover the clinical correlates. That's why we've been emphasizing clinical correlates for so much time now, because you're not going to spend this entire time learning about like macula adhesions and get tested on the macula adhesions in BSCE. No one cares. They care if it's like the bullous pemphigoid versus pemphigoris vulgus. Like the difference between those is what they care about. So that way they can test you on second order, third order, fourth order level questions rather than being like, what does a gap junction do? So
Right.
it's not going to be like that.
Yes, and then as far as the term, okay, so Marissa was asking about getting access to the term 2 material. So I know we asked some of our friends for the slides ahead of time, and I think we could probably, Kishore, maybe either post those or put them on the drive, because you probably won't actually have access to that stuff until maybe the weekend before. I mean, it's not going to be that much ahead of time. I remember what I did. I did not finish all of ER on my break because I was working, but what I did do, and I did find this very helpful, I did all of the small groups for ER because there was a lot of histo small group, and I always found that to be really time consuming, but also really helpful. I liked always labeling my own small group stuff myself and like finding the answers, because even if I collabed with my small group, if I did it all myself and wrote it all, took all the time to search for it and write it out, I usually didn't have to study much histo for the exam. And the ER histo was probably the hardest histo of term 2. It was the ER histo is super weird. Like the female follicles and ovaries and stuff, it is the strangest thing. It still doesn't make sense to me. So all of the endocrine, male repro and female repro histo small groups, I did ahead of time. And that probably took me a good half of the day total, like probably at least 10 or 12 hours to do all of those. So getting a blank version of those, I had asked a friend that was in the term ahead of me, but getting a blank version of those would be very helpful and would help with your reducing your time. So if you don't want to necessarily go through all of it, but you want to get ahead, that would be a good way to start. The small groups in term 2 are pretty much the same as they were in term 1. There's some histo ones, there's some that are not histo. And once you get to neuro, they're a little bit less histo based and they're more clinical correlate based, but it's pretty much the same. You can miss the same number of them. There's going to be histology ones and then clinical case ones. So that's about the same. But kind of tying into that, we can try to post, I think, some of those lectures and small group documents, maybe blank ones and filled in ones and see how we can do that. And you will, oh yeah, there's a question to me in the chat. You will get new groups. Your small group won't be the same this next term.
Also, feel free. We kind of like have been talking this entire time and not really going through all of the chat questions. So feel free to raise your hand, yourself, and we'll kind of address any kind of questions you guys have. And I see there's someone's raised their hand.
Hi, Kishore. I have a quick question about the BSCE. So like with term one, I found that the cumulative questions, they're pretty straightforward. Like I mean, some of them were a little harder, but then it was still straightforward. It wasn't the nitty gritty stuff that you were talking about. For the BSCE, are our questions gonna look like the cumulative questions we've had on our T1 exams, or is it going to be like the nitty gritty? Like, what are the expectations? Do they want us to kind of like dive deep into the material and become experts, like revisit every concept in detail, or just kind of look at, like, I guess just the IMCQs and the quizzes and just kind of know like the basics?
Yeah, so the thing with that is if there's a clinical correlate attached to the disorder, or sorry, if it's clinical correlate attached to like anatomy or physiology, they're going to likely test it. Okay, they're not going to get into the level of depth. Like, let's say you were in CPR and you learned tetralogy of Fallot, and in tetralogy of Fallot, you have to figure out like cardiac output, like how it's changed, what murmur goes with it. No, they're not going to get into that level of depth. They don't expect you guys to become cardiologists overnight. Okay, it's kind of insane. But what they will likely test is like based off of like, this presentation, what do you think is likely the diagnosis? Is it going to be a machine-like murmur? Like something as simple as that. You can be like, oh, patent ductus arteriosus. I just gave you guys a BSCE question right there. Okay. So that's how simple they like to ask those questions, because you guys have, believe it or not, you have a wealth of cumulative knowledge already. You just don't have that level of depth after you leave that module. Okay. And don't freak out about it, because you're going to be going through the IMCQs and the quizzes. And I was freaking out every day. And I'm pretty sure Kassidy was too. Like we were like, oh crap, I don't even remember like cardiac output anymore, how it changes based off of this parameter. And they really got into the weeds and the depths with all of this material in each of the module, and they tested you guys like you guys were experts on that module. They won't do that for BSCE because it's a cumulative exam. They don't expect you guys to become cardiologists, oncologists and all these sort of things by the time you guys show up for your board exams. Okay, they just expect you guys to have a broad medical knowledge and that you can address at least each of the question to a sufficient level of depth of just diagnosis, or potentially a second order question of like, okay, what else would you likely see with this? Okay, like tetralogy of Fallot, are you going to see something with like Down syndrome, rubella, like etc. So nothing too crazy.
Yeah.
So best practice. Oh,
sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so best practice would be when I review the term one material, I should pay close attention to the clinical correlates, and the drugs, right? Because those are important as well, and they go hand in hand. Or no?
Not for BSCE. You don't need to worry about the drugs, which is so awesome. Okay. So there's going to be no pharmacological stuff on the BSCE. So you don't even have to stress about that at all.
Oh, excellent. Okay, perfect. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I wanted to add because first of all, like you guys I would not be freaking out about the BSCE right now. Don't worry about it. I wasn't freaking out about it until like the week before, just because I was trying to block it out of my brain. But you guys will have a small group sometime in the middle of the term where you talk about the BSCE and you talk about the curve. So the BSCE is curved. It's not like the rest of the exams where, oh, you maybe might get a curve if there was a lot of questions that had questionable, there's a lot of feedback left, or if the average was low, whatever. The BSCE is curved. It's made to be curved. It's made so that people aren't going to score super awesome on it. And that's what the curve is based off of. And you have an entire hip width explaining how they do the curve, calculating Z-scores, all of that stuff. And so it's not a big stress. There's going to be stuff on it you won't know, because like you said, Rishna, I was kind of expecting the cumulative questions, especially from term 1, to be similar to the questions that we had been seeing as cumulatives on the exams. And so I thought, okay, yeah, I should be good. I mean, I think it's going to be similar questions. And I just went through the IMCQs and made sure I was familiar with stuff that I that I just forgotten about. But I will say, it wasn't really like that in my opinion. Some of the questions were like really specific that I wasn't expecting. And like Kishore and I both, I know we talked about, they threw a couple of math problems at us from like pulmonary, where you had to calculate like dead space and like all this stuff. And I was like, C looks good, next. Like, I'm not even gonna waste my time on that, because you have to remember that there's so much material to cover that you're really only going to have maybe 1 or 2 questions from each very specific topic like that. And it's not going to hurt you that much in the long run, because if you miss one and it's curved, like, you're going to end up being okay. So I didn't stress super hard about it. I did AEP and PLGs, and I reviewed IMCQs, and I scored very high. So I was completely satisfied with my score. So it's not something to be super stressed about, because you're not supposed to know everything on there, and some of it will be specific, but it's not something that you guys should be super stressed about. And yes, no farm at all, no drugs. So that's a big help.
Cassidy, you were an AEP facilitator, correct?
Yes.
And did that help you a lot with the BSCE prep? Okay.
Yeah,
thanks.
Absolutely. I know Kishore was saying that's a good way to get started with prepping for the term. If you don't want to start ER material, but you are planning on being a facilitator, that would be a great place to start. I completely agree with that, because you guys already have access to all of your stuff from term 1. They sometimes change up the order, which I'm sure you guys might have noticed. They changed up y'all's MSK order, and I know some of the people that held PLGs were completely unaware of that and were teaching the wrong material the first week. But you already have those slides, and the slides aren't going to change much. So if you're planning on facilitating, get a head start on that, because it takes so much time. I know some of you guys in my AEP were here, but like every single week, the last minute, my partner and I were still working on slides. It took probably at least 6 to 8 hours of prep every single week. So I would get a head start on that. It would help you significantly, because every week when I was like, we're not going to wait till the last minute this week, we did. And it was a lot. So it's helpful for sure, but it does take a lot of time. So it saves you, towards the end, because you've already relearned that for BSCE. But if you want to get a head start somewhere, you already have access to the material, go ahead and start making some slides, doing some practice questions on your slides, and that would save you a lot of time going forward.
So Cass, you were my facilitator and you're great, even though you almost left us during neuro, but it's okay, we forgive you. I think I asked in the chat, but you should download PowerPoint to prep for like AEP slides, or because I don't remember how to do this thing anymore.
I didn't. I guess this would depend on if you have a Mac or not, and who your partner is going to be. Because if you have a Mac and your partner has a Mac, then you can use Keynote and you can collab on stuff together. I do, and my partner did not. So we just use Google Slides for everything. And that made it a lot easier, because you can collab on Google Slides, anything, Google document wise, you can both work on at the same time. And then also when we were done with AEP for that week, we would just make a copy of that and send it over to our drive. So using Google for that made it a lot easier, as far as being able to collaborate with your partner, knowing who has done what. I know everybody is going to, depending on who your partner is, everyone's going to have a different idea of the way to prep stuff like that. You might be like, oh, you take these lectures, I'll take these, but we really kind of just, would try to cover all of the stuff, and we worked well together. So I would say you don't need to download PowerPoint. I don't think I have PowerPoint downloaded, so.
And you think it was good prep? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, just last thing. I just wanted to say, you think it's good prep for BSCE, right? Like, you didn't really prep otherwise for that, because I can't imagine like reviewing all of it. I'd go insane, I think.
Yeah, definitely, because it forces you to. When you have to show up at AEP every week, like, it was hard, definitely harder some of the weeks, especially right before an exam or things like that, but it forced you to do it. And you'll find that you learn something better to teach it to other people than you often even did the first time around. So I know Jordan and I, half the time we would be like learning stuff, and we were like, oh, like I didn't even get this the first, term, but then we understood it a lot better, because you tend to prep more thoroughly when you're going to have to get asked questions on it and be able to answer them. So I probably learned better the second time around. And then a lot of it, it was crazy because it was like relearning. You kind of lose it if you don't, it's use it or lose it. So we had to relearn it again the second time around, but then it was a lot more familiar and it wasn't as difficult in prepping for the BSc. I spent like half of a day on term 1 material in my BSc prep. So it's not that bad.
Sorry, Kassidy, I just have
Yeah.
a quick question. So for the OPLG, I saw different pairs. So like, would it be possible for me to sign up with 2 different people for an OPLG, or does it have to be one person? Do you know if we can like change pairs per week or something like that?
I
think
think
but I don't really
it's just you're stuck with the person you initially signed up with.
Okay.
You can do AEP and OPLG if I'm not mistaken, but I would highly recommend you be very cautious with that because you are human, okay, at the end of the day. And as amazing as you guys are I'm sure you guys still have to make sure you guys dedicate enough of your time to the actual material covering in the module itself that you're going to be going through, okay? It's not just about doing really well in the OPLG or AEP. You gotta crush term 2 module level exams too, okay? Don't overwork yourself, okay? Critical.
Would you recommend doing AEP or OPLG if you had to pick one?
I personally wanted to do AEP, but it didn't work out for some reason. So I recommend doing AEP because it really forces you to really show up every weekend or week and do the actual material and prep for it. Whereas OPLG, you can kind of get into this rut of like, I just have to do a minimum of this number of things and I can like, skip around this week or next week. But if you're doing AEP, you got to show up. There are a group of your own kind of support system that is expecting you guys to present the materials, give them helpful hints, give them external resources and links. So AEP puts you and forces you to be on a better track. That being said, I feel like Amina's has raised her hand for like a long time. What's your question, Amina?
Hi, how are you?
Doing good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for doing this for us. I highly appreciate your help and support.
Yeah, of
I have
course.
2 questions. Kindly asking if it's possible to get a copy of the schedule you have so I can follow up the order of the lectures I need to review.
Grace's schedule, maybe? Are you talking about?
A term 2 schedule.
Oh,
you're talking about like the SGU schedule that we got?
Yes.
Okay, I would be cautious with that because as much as our term was somewhat fine and we didn't really ask for too many changes. I mean, we did ask for sufficient because we love to advocate for, making changes, but they might change up how ER is taught because I know initially when I covered it over break, I did repro all of it first, and then they ended up doing endocrine first when we covered it, and I was like, geez Louise, like I am light years ahead, but like at the same time I am behind. So got to make sure you guys get the appropriate thing. Obviously, if you're going to cover the entire module, you're fine. You've learned all of it. But the last thing I covered was like endocrine. And then I felt like super wobbly on it showing up the first day because I didn't have that many passes through the material.
Okay, sounds good. My other question, like, as you know, it's a lot of resources. I don't want to subscribe a lot. What is your advice? I know it is different from person to person, but like, I most likely I will do 1 or 2. I don't want to do more than that.
Okay, my philosophy with any of this, don't buy anything right now. Okay. Don't buy anything. You're tempted every day. Like there's a 30% discount on Amboss or like a, $50 off from Boards and Beyond. It's great. Don't get me wrong. You'll need it at one point in your life. But I'm speaking for myself and probably Kassidy would agree too. Like we used a lot of external resources that were 100% free from YouTube on the regular. Like we used the Noted Anatomist for like some anatomy concepts. We used Ninja Nerd for like cranial nerves and tracks and stuff. You don't have to pay for any of all of that. Like it's free. And like we have CK Med, like that's also there, like the YouTube channel too. So we will link you guys out to resources that are free that we found helpful, that helped us learn it better, so that you guys don't have to purchase things right away. If you guys do want to purchase it, it's up to you, man. We're not discouraging you, but there's plenty of fishes out in the sea. You guys are going to be completely fine.
Thank
Yeah,
you. I appreciate it.
I think it varies a lot depending on module. And so we can definitely share what we did, for each module. I want to say for ER, I'm pretty sure I just used the slides. I felt like ER was pretty straightforward. It was quick. There was a little bit of the endocrine, maybe that was kind of hard, but the anatomy is very straightforward. You get some of those really good anatomy professors for the repro anatomy, like Rayburn and Rao and those good ones. And then it's quick. It's like 3 weeks long. Now DM was a beast, but like Kishore said, Dr. Apadia is the one that coordinated that whole thing. You have her every single day. She teaches the pathways like every single day between her and Trots. So at least you get, that. I would say neuro is where we had to branch out and do our own things. But I will also say I used YouTube so much for this term because you can just start YouTubing stuff and you'll find random videos that are so good. And you can go to that person's channel like CK Med or the Noted Anatomist, like Kishore said. And I mean, I've had a Boards and Beyond subscription since the beginning of term 1, but that's the only thing I've bought. And I would definitely not feel like I even would have had to. I use it for sure, but it's not necessary. And all the other stuff that we use is not anything that I've had to pay to subscribe to. So don't worry about any of that for right now.
Thank you. It makes sense. I appreciate it.
Yes, of course.
Any other questions, guys? Raise your hands. We were happy to answer all of them because I know we were freaked out the same way you guys were probably right now, and we had plenty of questions. So feel free to ask us.
Really quick, Kishore, I want to go back to the whole AEP versus PLG thing. I totally agree with you. AEP is going to get you better prepared. It's going to keep you more on a strict time frame, timeline, stuff like that. But if you are someone that maybe you're on the fence and you're not sure if you're going to be able to handle it, or if you're maybe not great at taking on a lot of things at once, it might be better to do PLGs versus if you're going to, maybe do AEP or do nothing, it might be better to do PLGs. That's a very good happy medium, because the thing about those is you don't have to hold them every week. You're not forced to. You kind of can sign up when you feel like you can. And maybe if you're really struggling one week or you have an exam or something like that, you can take that week off. So if you think maybe you're interested in facilitating something, but you're not fully ready to jump the gun and commit to something every week, PLGs are a really good happy medium. So worst case, just sign up. I know there's going to be a deadline coming up for at least applying. Sign up and apply for it. It doesn't necessarily mean you're committed to holding one every week if you go ahead and sign up for the PLGs. Now, AEP, they will, it depends on the interest, but I know with our class, there was a lot of interest in AEP, so they had to go through like several rounds of this process and weed people out because there was just so many people interested. But if you're someone that can take on a lot and you're really good with being busy and you're really good under pressure and you can spend a lot of time applying yourself, then yes, it was super great because I had a really great AEP group. I got really lucky. We had great group and I love all of them. So I really enjoyed meeting every week, but it is a lot of work. So it just depends on what you want or what you like. But if you maybe think you can handle something, but you don't want to put in all the work, then PLGs might be a good happy medium there.
Okay, you guys are not slackers. Trust me. You guys thinking you guys are slackers, but trust me, you guys are still killing it. Make sure you guys are cautious though. Your time is precious. You don't realize it. Remember, at one point in your life, you're going to get paid for that amount of hours or medical knowledge that you guys have dedicated to your training. Okay. Also, the DLAs tend to be heavy. Okay, this was a question that was raised by Nadia. The DLAs tend to be heavy based off of the different modules. NB, you were learning like entire lecture level materials in a DLA, and it shook us to the core. Okay, that being said,
NB1, I remember us. We were both saying we all like told the term once, you'll never have as many DLAs as you had in FTM. That was horrible. That'll never happen again. NB1 hits, and we got like 25 DLAs in the first week. And I was like, yo, who signed up for this? This is crazy. So,
and they were like straight up like concepts, like you felt like you could walk through endocrine and you were like, okay, like this hormone does this thing does this thing. You get to tracks, you need someone to explain that thing out to you like if it was like ABCDs. Like it had to be boiled down, and the DLAs are super hard to kind of tie it all together. So my firm and unwavering recommendation is draw out the actual tracks like if it was one of your biochemistry kind of pathways. Okay, start from like one part of your arm, being like, okay, like innervation goes to this spinal level, and at that spinal level it either crosses over or doesn't cross over, or it ascends or descends, etc. Okay, otherwise when they show you the DLAs and you're like looking at MRI images, you're just like, what am I looking at? Like, I didn't become a radiologist overnight. So you got to be very patient with yourself and give yourself enough time in NB. And that's why, if you guys remember, like we kind of went radio silent during NB because we were freaking out. Like we have no idea what the heck is happening. So
Yeah.
that being said,
And a lot of the
take some
DLAs
time.
also don't have videos. So you got kind of get into that whole world where you're venturing into like having to teach yourself everything. So we'll try to be more present and hold stuff for you guys when you get to NB. And I know I've told like my AEP group too, I've kept my resources very organized and what I used and things like that, because you have to teach yourself a lot in that module, but it's still a ways away. So I wouldn't worry too much about that yet.
Natalie, if I'm saying your name
Yes,
right.
Natalie.
Hi, yes, thanks for letting me ask my question. So I was wondering about research versus doing OPLG or AEP. Has anybody done two of them, like both the research and that?
Yeah. So that's a tricky question right there, because remember, okay, this is, I think, something you're gonna hear when you get to your hip whip session with Dr. Lucas and everything like that. He's like, you guys are great. You guys are gonna do great in your med school careers. You're gonna crush it. You're gonna get through all the exams. But if you don't have anything else to kind of showcase, right, like your awesomeness during residency programs and etc., that's where like your MSRI and all of your experience with that is going to be great. But if you get bad grades, like I'm not saying bad grades, but like if you're barely making it and you do like research, it's not going to have that much value to it. Okay. So it's a fine kind of tightrope walking with the situation, because my work is in research. So I'm kind of home free with not having to be an MSRI or doing any of those things tied to the school. That's something you can explore, but you got, like I'm saying, I think the biggest theme at this point is you got to be cautious with your time, especially in term 2, because you have very little bit and you're doing a lot more and covering harder material. Okay. So I'm going to suggest, for your own benefit, focus on OPLG and AEP if you're interested. Do research later, because research, the thing is, the payout for research is it's a juggle, because what they care about more often is if you get published. Okay. If you don't get published and you spent like 4 years in a research lab, it's like same like in med school. You spend 4 years in doing research in undergrad and you apply to med school, you got no research paper, and all you can really show for it is that you can titrate something and you can wash, the lab equipment without like any kind of concern from your supervisor. Okay. That's why you got to be very cautious with research, especially lab research or even clinical research, because the outcome can vary on, like, it can be years before your name gets out there. Okay. That being said, you can always pursue external avenues with other institutions or things, because like we're all online. I mean, there's some benefit that you guys are online. You guys can do potentially at your local hospital levels. You can potentially reach out to them, do some research on the side via biostatistics or crunching data, and that helps you get on a paper and get your name out there. But the med schools as well as residency programs, they're going to care about your grades as much. Okay. It's not saying like you guys all have to pass with honors and be like rock stars. They want to have a sufficient level of competency in medical knowledge. So just be cautious that you're walking a fine, tightrope walk.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem. Sorry, that was a lot. I just kind of went on my little ramble, but hope that
No, I
helps.
totally agree with that, though. Like, be well-rounded, but don't do stuff. The payout with research, I don't think is as great. We heard that from everybody too. It's better to maybe join a club, do some AEP, PLGs, but the research thing might be a lot more taxing than it is rewarding. So it might not be necessarily worth it, unless you can maybe over the summer find some like local research to do with a hospital or something before you start the term. That might not be a bad idea, just to like add that to your resume. But otherwise, I don't think it's as important to get into.
Selectives for T2. Okay. I would say for selectives, it's not there. I mean, since actually you guys are going to be August, so
Like
they
this
might have more selectives.
Yeah.
Since folks are going back to the island, they might have more selectives if you go back. Just a little kind of nudge for you guys if you guys want to go. They have a lot of cool selectives on the island, not so much if you're online. So just be aware of that. So it's going to be the same kind of selectives that you probably like yoga, Tai Chi, and kind of like wellness level ones. Whereas like on the island, they have a lot more cooler, selectives. I don't specifically have names. You can ask your other upper term friends on it. But just be aware of that. Nadia, question.
Hi, yes, thank you for answering our questions. I just had a quick question regarding, for this summer, for this little break that we have, is it putting us at a disadvantage if we don't go do research or if we don't go work and do something in this time, or what would you guys recommend?
Enjoy it. Enjoy the break. Seriously. You and Kishore is a different human being in that he finishes every module before it starts. Like, that's not normal. Kishore is in the minority there. That's not, you should not have to do that. He's just a go-getter. Like, I'm pretty sure he's probably mostly done with our term 3 material right now, and I haven't even looked at it. So like Kishore, yeah, and it will be very helpful if you want to get a preview, but do not feel bad about not doing so. You should definitely enjoy the break, sleep, lay in bed, watch Netflix, like do things that you're not going to get to do any other time, because this will be the last long break that you guys have for a really, really, really long time, like maybe forever. So yeah.
I 100% agree with this. I'm not a different human being. I'm just the crazier versions of human beings. So remember, guys, when you guys look at the timeline of med school, your chances of getting breaks are very limited. Okay. This is a short amount of time. It's great. You can do something with it. Like, don't get me wrong, you can, but you also won't get this level of break until you're done with your boards. Okay. We're talking about when you're about to become a resident. That's the next time you're going to likely get a proper break. Okay. That is putting into context your medical career and journey. So just be aware, take some time. You guys deserve it. Believe it or not. You guys got through term 1. You guys deserve a break. You guys try to, recuperate so that by the time you guys show up to term 2, you guys are ready, you're mentally there, and you're kind of pumped for this material again.
Yeah, Rita was asking in the chat. This is probably something that's good to address because I don't know if everybody exactly knows how this works, but SGU's semesters are a little bit different than the traditional semesters, because the term 3 it's kind of like term 3 and term 4. They're separate, but they're kind of crunched together like this really, really long marathon of a term. And so I guess the best comparison would be Brady and Lindsay's term right now, because they're the January. So they started term 3 in January. So this will be you guys. So you'll have, term 2 will be this fall. You'll have a little bit off in December. Term 3 will start in January. And then term 3 is like 6 weeks long. And then you have like a weekend and term 4 starts. So it's really no break. And you start term 4, and their term 4 ends at the end of June, at the same time that we are starting term 3. And then term 5 starts at early August, back before everybody else does. So really you have this really, really, really long semester that's like almost 2 semesters. And then you have a short break of about a month off, give or take, and then you're back into term 5. So this is the last like long real break that you'll have for a while, because that next break is going to be not only following a beast of a term, but it's also going to be like not very long. So that's why this one should be enjoyed.
Yeah, just be aware, guys. Your breaks tend to kind of get shortened further and further as you get along your medical adventures. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Kishore and Cassidy. I know Cassidy is an anti-Anki person, so I guess this question is more for Kishore. I know you're an Anki fan, so like, did you do a lot of Anki during term 2, or?
Yeah, so I did, and it was really nice in ER because I was kind of done with the module. So I was just clicking my way through ER because like I had learned all the material at least like 1 or 2 passes by the time I showed up for actual lectures. So I was just like doing Anki a lot more. But for DM, I don't know how much help it was because biochemistry, you can't just learn it based off of flashcards because like Anki is kind of a flashcard system. That being said, some people really crushed, Anki during DM. They loved it. They learned all of the like the little minor pathways and etc. But I had to draw everything out. And as someone who kind of did decently on DM, you guys got to make sure if you are more of a visual person, you're going to have to draw out the pathways. Look at the little branch points from there, tie things together. I think they're going to provide you guys with more resources, and we will too by the time you guys show up for DM. But I didn't use it as much for DM as I used for NB. And NB, I was running like the wind because I was like, okay, I got to get through every single track. I got to make sure I know like every single anatomical structures of the brain, embryological origins, what pharyngeal arch creates your mandibular division, like versus like this thing. So be selective with your Anki. It's okay. Like you guys don't have to be regular on every single module. See what works for you. As much as med school is about like figuring out what works for you, it's almost as much about figuring when to adapt and change for each module.
Thank you. I know I always I feel like I have like a way of doing things, and then like it just like a switch into something completely different. But you guys have like helped so much last term, like when that shift was happening, like how to cope up with it and stuff. So thank you guys so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and we'll continue to try to provide you guys with resources and review sessions when we can. Obviously, we're going to be getting into clinical medicine and the didactics component in term 4. So we're going to be on a whole new kind of learning curve there too. But whenever we can, we will happily answer messages and kind of get through any review sessions we can with you guys on term 2 stuff and term 1 stuff.
Yeah, for sure. It's just like term 1 where each module you're going to have to approach differently. So this is kind of just as general of an overview as possible and maybe more about ER because that's where you're going to start. But it is just like where you shifted from studying for FTM to studying for MSK. DM was a completely different beast, like Kishore said. It's not, you can't memorize stuff. It's one of those modules where you're not going to know everything. There's no way you can learn everything they teach you. So that's probably why Anki wasn't used by as many, because it's not as much rote memorization. It's just a lot of stuff and you got to learn what's most important. So we will try to get further into the details of each module as they come because they're all very different from one another.
Yep. Any other questions, comments, concerns? If not, we're going to get to the last slide. Thank you guys for showing up on your break. Enjoy your actual break and congrats on finishing term 1. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing and see all of your beautiful faces, and congrats again. Have a good one, guys.